Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked around Station Meridian for the first time. The place was huge. Metal walls stretched in every direction, curving upward until they met somewhere far above his head. Lights glowed in colors he had never seen before. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet he could not name. He was not alone. Dr. Amy Chen walked beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the sights. Ben Parker followed behind them, his hand resting near his weapon out of habit. The three of them were the first humans to ever visit this station. Earth had finally been invited to join the Galactic Council, and they were here to represent their entire species. Strange creatures moved through the corridors around them. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others had 4 legs or 6 or floated through the air without legs at all. Jake saw beings covered in scales, beings made of what looked like living crystal, and beings that seemed to shift shape as they moved. Every one of them stopped to stare at the humans. A tall figure approached them. She stood on 2 legs, but her body was covered in golden fur. Her face looked almost like a cat, with large amber eyes and pointed ears that swiveled to track sounds. She wore robes that shimmered when she moved. "I am Matriarch Kessa," she said. Her voice came from a device on her chest that translated her words into English. "Welcome to Station Meridian. You are the humans, yes?" Jake nodded. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Amy Chen and Ben Parker." Kessa's ears flattened slightly. "We must speak. There is a problem. A terrible problem." She led them through the station. Other creatures like Kessa moved through the halls. They were the Velkrin, Jake had learned during his training. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, known as great warriors and hunters. But today, the Velkrin they passed looked worried. Some had their ears pressed flat against their heads. Others made low sounds in their throats. Kessa took them to a large room with windows that looked out at the stars. Inside, several other Velkrin waited. They all wore the same worried expressions. 3 months ago, our cubs began to change, Kessa said. They stopped coming out of their dens. They would not eat. They would not play. When we tried to approach them, they ran away. They cried and shook with fear. Amy leaned forward. "Are they sick?" "We do not know," another Velkrin said. "We brought doctors. We brought healers from 5 different species. We tried medicine, we tried mind healing, we tried everything we know. Nothing helps. The cubs are terrified of everyone, even their own parents," Jake frowned. "Every cub? Or just some of them?" "Every single cub born in the last year," Kessa said. Her voice was heavy with sadness. "On this station and on 3 others. Over 200 cubs in total. None of them will let anyone near. They huddle together in the dark and cry. This has never happened before. In 10,000 years of Velkrin history, nothing like this has ever been recorded." "What do your scientists think is causing it?" Amy asked, Kessa's tail lashed behind her. "They have no idea. Some think it is a disease. Others believe it is something in the station's environment. But we have tested everything. The air, the water, the food. We have scanned the cubs with every device we have. There is nothing wrong with them physically, yet they live in constant terror." Ben spoke for the first time. "Can we see them?" The Velkrin exchanged glances. Kessa's ears drooped. "You can try. But I warn you, they will only hide from you as they hide from us." They followed Kessa through more corridors, going deeper into the station. The sounds changed here. Jake could hear soft crying, the kind of sound a kitten might make. His chest tightened at the noise. Kessa stopped outside a door. "In here are 5 cubs. Their parents wait nearby but cannot go in. The cubs scream if anyone enters." Through a window in the door, Jake saw a large room filled with soft materials and toys. In the far corner, pressed against the wall, 5 small Velkrin huddled together. They were covered in soft gray fur. Their eyes were huge in their small faces. They shook constantly. "They look so scared," Amy whispered. "They are," Kessa said. "And we do not know how to help them." Jake felt something twist in his chest. He had seen that kind of fear before, back on Earth. He had volunteered at an animal shelter once. Some of the cats there had been abused. They looked just like these cubs, pressed into corners, too afraid to trust anyone. The humans were given quarters near the diplomatic sector. Jake could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about the cubs, about their huge, frightened eyes. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and went for a walk. The station was quieter at night. Most of the aliens had their own sleep cycles. Jake wandered through empty corridors until he found himself in a garden area. Plants from a dozen worlds grew here under artificial lights. The air was humid and smelled like growing things. He heard it then. Soft crying, just like before. Jake followed the sound. It led him to a ventilation grate set low in one wall. He knelt down and looked inside. 3 small faces looked back at him. Cubs. They must have crawled through the ventilation system to escape. They huddled together in the narrow space, shaking and mewing. "Hey there," Jake said softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The cubs stared at him. They did not run away. That was strange. Every report said the cubs ran from everyone. Jake stayed very still. He had learned a long time ago that scared animals needed time and space. "I know you're scared," he continued, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Everything here is new and strange. All these different creatures. All these different smells. It's a lot, isn't it?" One of the cubs took a small step forward. Then another. Jake held his breath. The cub reached the edge of the grate. Its tiny nose twitched as it sniffed the air near Jake's hand. "That's right," Jake murmured. "I'm not scary. Just a human. We're new here too." The cub came closer. Then, moving slowly, it stepped out of the grate. The other 2 followed. They approached Jake with tiny, careful steps. Their eyes never left his face. Jake sat down on the floor, making himself smaller. One of the cubs climbed into his lap. The other 2 pressed against his sides. They were warm and soft. They smelled like cinnamon and sunshine, and they were purring. Jake sat there in the garden, 3 alien cubs cuddled against him, and wondered what it meant. Why were they not afraid of him when they were afraid of everyone else? What made humans different? He did not know. But he knew that somehow something important had just happened. Something that might change everything for the Velcrin. Maybe even for all of humanity. The cubs purred in his lap, finally at peace. And Jake Morrison, the first human to comfort them, made a promise to himself. He would figure this out. He would help these frightened children. Whatever it took. Morning came to Station Meridian. Jake woke to someone pounding on his door. He stumbled out of bed and opened it to find Ben standing there with an urgent look on his face. "You need to come with me right now," Ben said. "The whole station is talking about you." Jake rubbed his eyes. "What? Why?" "The garden. The security cameras. They saw everything." Jake's stomach dropped. He had not thought about cameras. He had just been trying to help the cubs. Now he followed Ben through the corridors. Aliens everywhere stopped to stare at him. Some pointed. Others made sounds he could not understand. They reached the same meeting room from yesterday. It was packed with creatures. Velcrin filled most of the space, but Jake saw other species too. Beings with blue skin and multiple arms. Small creatures that floated in bubbles of water. Things that looked like living plants. Matriarch Kessa stood at the front. Her eyes locked onto Jake the moment he entered. "Captain Morrison." "Please come forward." Jake walked to the front of the room. He felt everyone watching him. Amy and Ben pushed through the crowd to stand beside him. "Last night," Kessa said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "something happened that we cannot explain. The security system recorded you in the garden. With 3 of our cubs. Cubs that have run from every being who approached them for months. Yet they came to you. They sat with you. They showed no fear at all." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jake saw shock on the faces around him. "I want to see it again," a Velcrin male said. "Show us the recording." A screen appeared on the wall. It showed Jake in the garden, kneeling by the ventilation grate. The room fell silent as they watched the cubs approach him. When the first cub climbed into his lap, several Velcrin made choking sounds. "Impossible," someone whispered. The recording ended. Kessa turned to Jake. "Explain this. How did you do it?" "I don't know," Jake said honestly. "I just talked to them. Kept my voice soft. Stayed still. I used to volunteer at an animal shelter back home. Scared cats needed the same kind of approach." "You compared our cubs to animals?" a Velcrin growled. "No," Jake said quickly. "I just meant that fear is fear. When something is scared, you have to show them you're safe. You move slowly. You speak gently. You let them come to you." Kessa's ears were standing straight up. "I want you to try again." "In a controlled setting. With witnesses." "Okay," Jake said. "When?" "Now." They moved to a different room. This one had thick glass windows so observers could watch from outside. Inside the room, Jake saw 5 cubs huddled in a corner. Different cubs from last night. These ones were smaller, their fur still fuzzy with youth. "The parents are watching," Kessa said, pointing to two adult Velcrin pressed against the glass. They have not been able to touch their children in 2 months. If you can help, we will be grateful beyond measure. Jake nodded. He stepped into the room. The cubs saw him and pressed tighter together. But they did not run. That was good. Jake sat down on the floor about 10 feet away from them. He did not try to get closer. He just sat there and started talking. "Hi there," he said quietly. "My name is Jake. I'm from a planet called Earth. It's very far away from here. We have animals on Earth that look a little bit like you. We call them cats. I had a cat when I was young. Her name was Pepper." The cubs watched him. Their ears swiveled to catch his words even though they probably could not understand them. "Pepper was scared when we first got her," Jake continued. "She hid under my bed for 3 days. Wouldn't come out for anything. But I would sit near the bed and talk to her. Tell her about my day. Read her books. Eventually she got curious. She came out. And after that we were best friends." One of the cubs tilted its head. Jake saw its nose twitch. "I know everything here is scary," he said. "Lots of new people. New smells. New sounds. Your brain is telling you to be afraid. But I promise most people here want to help you. Your parents love you. They're scared too because they can't help you." A cub took a step forward. Just one step. But the watching crowd outside gasped. Jake heard it even through the glass. "That's it," Jake said, smiling. "You're very brave. Want to come say hi?" The cub took another step. Then another. The other 4 watched. Slowly, carefully, the first cub crossed the distance between them. It stopped right in front of Jake. Its small face tilted up to look at him. Jake held out his hand, palm down. The cub sniffed it. Its whiskers tickled Jake's skin. Then, in a movement that made Jake's heart swell, the cub rubbed its face against his hand. The other 4 cubs rushed forward. They climbed on Jake, purring and mewing. Their tiny paws kneaded his legs. One crawled up to his shoulder. Another curled in his lap. They were warm and soft and so trusting. Jake looked up at the window. The parent Velcrin had their paws pressed against the glass. The mother was crying. All around them, the observers stood frozen in shock. Dr. Amy Chen pushed through the crowd outside. With her was another human, a man named Greg Patterson. He was a scientist who studied aliens. He carried scanning equipment. "Let me in," Greg said to the Velcrin guards. "I need to scan him while this is happening." They opened the door carefully. Greg slipped inside. The cubs looked up at him but did not run. They stayed with Jake. Greg ran his scanners over Jake, then over the cubs. He muttered to himself as he read the results. "Anything?" Amy asked from outside. "Nothing unusual," Greg called back. "Jake's biochemistry is normal for a human. He's not emitting any strange pheromones, no unusual radiation, no psychic field. He's just sitting there." "Then why aren't they afraid?" Kessa demanded. Greg shook his head. "I have no idea. They spent the next hour running tests. Other humans from the delegation volunteered to try." Lieutenant Nicole Hayes entered the room. The cubs looked at her, then walked over to her. No fear. A civilian engineer named Lisa Morgan tried next. Same result. Even young Danny Wright, an intern barely out of his teens, had cubs climbing on him within minutes. But when a Velcrin doctor tried to enter, the cubs scattered immediately. They hid behind the humans, shaking. A Thraxian scientist tried. The cubs screamed. Every non-human who entered sent the cubs into panic. Only humans seemed to be safe. By midday, news had spread through the entire station. More humans were called in from Earth's ship. All of them had the same effect. Cubs would approach them, sit with them, show no fear. Kessa called another meeting. This time she invited leaders from a dozen species. They all wanted to understand what made humans special. "This makes no sense," a Thraxian scientist said. Its voice buzzed through a translator. "We have scanned the humans. They are not unique. Their biology is similar to many species. What they are doing should not be possible." "Yet it is possible," Kessa said. We all watched it happen. A Xinthian empath spoke next. "The Xinthians could sense emotions. I read the humans while they interacted with the cubs. They feel calm, patient, gentle. But many species feel this way. This alone cannot explain it. Maybe it's something in their evolution," Amy suggested. She stood up, holding a datapad. "With permission, I'd like to access the station's library. I want to research Velcrin history. Maybe there's something there that can help us understand." Kessa nodded. "You have full access. Anything that might help, we need to know. Jake spent the rest of the day with the cubs. Their parents watched through the glass, desperate to be with their children but unable to. It broke Jake's heart. He talked to the cubs constantly, telling them stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains, about cities full of humans, about animals that humans lived with. We have dogs, he told them. They're like wolves, but friendly. They live with us, sleep in our houses, play with our children. And cats, like I mentioned. Lots of humans have cats. We take care of them and they take care of us. One of the cubs purred louder. Jake scratched behind its ears. It leaned into his touch. We learned a long time ago that being friends with other creatures makes life better, Jake said. We're not alone on Earth. We share it with millions of other species. Some are dangerous, sure, but most are just trying to live their lives, same as us. He did not know if the cubs understood his words, but they understood his tone. They understood that he meant them no harm, and that, Jake thought, had to mean something. As the station's artificial night began, Jake carefully moved the cubs back to their corner. He backed toward the door slowly. The cubs watched him but did not follow. They looked sad to see him go. I'll come back tomorrow, Jake promised. I won't leave you alone. Outside, Kessa waited for him. Captain Morrison, what you are doing here may be the most important thing to happen to my people in 1,000 years. Thank you, Jake nodded. He felt tired but also energized. There was a mystery here, a reason why humans could do what no one else could, and he was determined to solve it. 3 days passed. The humans on Station Meridian found themselves with a new purpose. Every day they spent hours with the frightened cubs. Word came from the other stations with the same problem. Humans were being sent there too, and everywhere the result was the same. Cubs that feared everything would approach humans without hesitation. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. They demanded answers. Species from across known space sent representatives. They all wanted to know what made humans so special. Jake stood in front of hundreds of aliens. Beside him stood Amy, Ben, and a dozen other humans. Kessa was there too, along with Velcrin from all 4 affected stations. We have been testing for days, a Calibri mind healer announced. The Calibri looked like tall, thin beings made of silver light. We have examined humans from every angle. We find nothing that should give them this ability. No special biology, no psychic power, no technological advantage. Yet the cubs respond to them and only them. There must be something, argued a Meldrani scientist. The aquatic being's voice bubbled through its translation device. Effects have causes. This is basic science, Amy stepped forward. May I speak? The council leader, an ancient being called a witness, nodded. The witnesses were among the oldest species in the galaxy. They kept records of everything. I've been studying Velcrin history, Amy said. Dr. Greg Patterson and I have spent the last 3 days in your archives. We found something interesting. Very interesting. A screen appeared behind her. It showed text in dozens of languages. 10,000 years ago, the Velcrin lived on their homeworld, Amy continued. They were not yet spacefaring. They were hunters, predators at the top of their food chain. But they were not alone. The screen changed to show an image. It was old, primitive, but Jake could make out 2 types of creatures. One was clearly an early Velcrin. The other looked different, smaller. Walking on 4 legs, these are called the Kasali, Amy said. The old texts barely mention them. They're described as primitive creatures that shared the Velcrin homeworld. But look at their behavior patterns. She pulled up more texts. Greg helped her translate the old language. The Kasali were pack hunters, Amy explained. They worked together to bring down prey. They were social, living in family groups. And here's the important part. They competed with early Velcrin for territory and food. Kessa leaned forward. What happened to them? Amy's expression grew sad. They went extinct. About 8,000 years ago, right as the Velcrin were developing advanced civilization. The texts don't say exactly how. But reading between the lines, it seems the Velcrin hunted them out of existence. Angry sounds came from the Velcrin in the room. Kessa's fur stood on end. Are you accusing our ancestors of genocide? No, Greg said quickly. It was survival. 2 predator species competing for the same resources. It's happened on dozens of worlds. On Earth, too. Humans caused other species to go extinct. It's part of nature, not a moral failing. What does this have to do with the cubs? The witness asked. Amy changed the screen again. Look at the Kasali hunting behavior. They were persistent predators. They would chase prey for hours, even days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. They killed by wearing their target down, not by brute force. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He knew where this was going. Now look at humans, Amy said. She brought up data about human evolution. Humans are also persistence predators. We evolved to run long distances, to track prey for hours, to outlast rather than overpower. The similarities between human and Kesali hunting patterns are remarkable. But many species are persistence predators, a scientist objected. This cannot be the only reason. It's not, Greg said. He stepped forward. There's more. Look at the Kesali social structure. Family groups of 20 to 50 individuals, complex communication, care for injured members. And this, most importantly, they were one of the few species on the Velcrin homeworld that did not hunt Velcrin cubs. The room fell silent. Greg continued. Most predators on that world, when they could, would kill competitor cubs. It's a strategy to reduce future competition. But the Kesali didn't. The old texts mention this specifically. They called the Kesali cowards for it. But it wasn't cowardice. It was a different survival strategy. Amy nodded. The Velcrin cubs are responding to genetic memory. Something encoded deep in their instincts. Every species they've encountered since reaching the stars has triggered a threat response. These cubs sense on an instinctual level that most species would harm them if given the chance. Because for most of Velcrin evolution, that was true. But humans don't trigger that response, Jake said, understanding now. Because we're like the Kesali. We evolved similar hunting strategies, similar social patterns. More than that, Greg said. Look at human history. We did something almost no other species has done. We made friends with our competitors. He brought up images from Earth. Dogs playing with humans, cats sleeping in human homes, horses carrying human riders, birds perched on human shoulders. We took wolves, apex predators that competed with us for food, and we turned them into companions, Greg said. We did the same with cats. With dozens of other species, we learned to communicate across species lines, to form bonds with creatures that were once our rivals. This is coded into human behavior, Amy added. The way we move, the way we speak, the way we make ourselves non-threatening. Cubs can sense it. They know instinctively that humans are safe, not because we're weak, but because we're the kind of predator that makes friends instead of killing competitors. Kessa stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet. You're saying our cubs fear everyone because deep in their genes they remember a time when everyone was a threat. Everyone except creatures like humans. Creatures like the ones we drove to extinction. Yes, Amy said gently. The room erupted. Aliens argued in a dozen languages. Some denied it. Others wanted more proof. The Velcrin looked shocked, horrified, ashamed. Jake watched it all and felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride that humans had this ability, sadness for the Kesali, gone for so long, and hope, because maybe this meant something good could come from it. The witness raised one appendage. The room fell silent. This theory has merit, the ancient being said, but theory is not proof. We need more testing. Over the next week, that's exactly what they did. Scientists examined everything. They studied human body language and compared it to what little data existed about the Kesali. They found matches. The way humans lowered their gaze to appear non-threatening. The way they made themselves smaller when approaching something scared. The soft tones they used. All of it matched Kesali behavior patterns. They brought in other persistence predators from other worlds. The cubs showed less fear of them than of other species, but still more fear than they showed humans. It wasn't just the hunting style. It was the combination of factors. Jake spent every day with the cubs. He started bringing their parents into the room with him. At first, the cubs hid behind him, but slowly, with a human present, they could tolerate their parents being close. Talk to them, Jake told one father. Keep your voice soft. Move slowly. Let them see that you're safe, the father tried. His large paws trembled. His child watched from behind Jake's legs. But the cub did not run. That was progress. Lisa Morgan came up with an idea. What if we teach the Velcrin to act more like humans? At least around the cubs? Act like another species? Kessa said. She sounded offended. Not permanently, Lisa said. Just until the cubs learn to trust you. Lower your posture. Soften your gaze. Move more slowly. Speak more gently. These are things you can do. It took convincing. The Velcrin were proud. Acting like another species felt wrong to them. but their love for their cubs was stronger than pride. Commander Ryan Foster, a military man, volunteered to teach them. "It's like training," he said. "Learning new movements, new behaviors. You can do this," so they practiced. Adult Velcrin learned to move like humans, to speak like humans, to project the same calm, patient energy. It felt awkward to them, unnatural. But when they tried it around the cubs, something amazing happened. The cubs responded, not as much as they did with real humans, but they responded. Fear levels dropped. Cubs that would not let their parents within 10 feet could now tolerate 5 feet, then 3 feet, then finally touch. The first time a Velcrin mother held her cub again, everyone watching cried. The cub buried its face in her fur. She wrapped around it, purring deep in her chest. Tears ran down her face. "Thank you," she whispered to Jake, who stood nearby. "Thank you for giving me back my child." Jake smiled. "You did the hard part. You learned. You adapted. That takes courage." By the end of the second week, progress was clear. Cubs were being reunited with their families. It took time. It took patience. It took humans acting as bridges between cubs and parents. But it was working. The Galactic Council met again. This time the mood was different. Hopeful instead of desperate. "Humanity has given us a gift," Kessa announced. "They showed us our own history, our own fears, and they showed us how to overcome them. We request that Earth be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges. They have earned it." The vote was unanimous. Jake stood with his fellow humans and felt pride swell in his chest. They had come to the stars not knowing what they would find. News of what happened on Station Meridian spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, every species knew about the humans and the Velcrin cubs. Some were amazed. Others were skeptical. A few were concerned about what this might mean for the balance of power in galactic politics. Jake found himself famous in a way he never expected. Aliens approached him in the corridors asking for interviews. Scientists wanted to study him. Young beings from a dozen species wanted to take pictures with him. It was overwhelming. "I just did what felt right," he told a reporter from the Thraxian news network. Anyone would have helped scared children, but the reporter, a insect-like being with compound eyes, shook its head. "No, Captain Morrison. Anyone would have wanted to help. Only humans could actually do it. That is the difference." Commander Helen Price arrived from Earth 3 weeks after the initial discovery. She was the head of Earth's diplomatic security, a no-nonsense woman who had spent decades protecting human interests. She brought with her a team of specialists and a mandate from Earth's government. "We need to understand the full implications of this," she told Jake during their first meeting. "Humanity has stumbled into something bigger than we realized. The ability to communicate across species barriers, to form trust where others cannot. That's not just useful. It's potentially the most valuable skill in the galaxy." Jake sat across from her in a conference room. Amy and Ben were there too, along with several Velcrin leaders including Kessa. "Earth wants to help," Helen continued. "We're prepared to send hundreds of volunteers. People trained in childcare, psychology, animal behavior. Anyone who can help with the cubs? We would be grateful," Kessa said. "But I must ask, what does Earth want in return?" Helen smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Information sharing, technology exchange, trade agreements, the usual diplomatic arrangements. But more than that, we want to understand this better. If humans have a unique ability, we need to know its limits and its applications." Over the next month, humans poured into Velcrin space. Laura Kim, a kindergarten teacher from California, brought an entire curriculum designed for traumatized children. She adapted it for the cubs. Officer Chris Morgan, who had worked with abused animals for years, developed training programs for the Velcrin parents. Danny Wright, the young intern, surprised everyone. He had a natural talent with the cubs. They loved him. He could get the most frightened cubs to play within minutes. When asked his secret, he just shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "I just treat them like people, like kids who are scared and need a friend." That simple approach worked better than all the complex theories. Humans who came with elaborate plans often struggled. Those who just sat down and talked to the cubs like they were talking to anyone else had the most success. But not every alien was happy about humanity's new importance. In the council chambers, Jake listened to debates that sometimes turned heated. "We cannot allow one species to have this much influence," a Xinthian delegate argued. What happens when every problem requires a human solution? We become dependent on them. They saved our cubs, a Velcrin countered. Would you prefer we let our children suffer because you're worried about human influence? I'm worried about balance, the Xinthian said. Humans have been in space for less than a century. Now they're being treated as if they're essential to galactic civilization. That's dangerous, Jake understood the concern. But he also saw the results. Cubs that had been catatonic with fear were now playing. Families were being reunited. How could that be wrong? Amy made another breakthrough during her 4th week on the station. She had been working with Greg and a team of xenobiologists from 5 different species. They were trying to understand the exact mechanism that made humans effective with the cubs. It's not just one thing, Amy explained during a presentation. It's a combination of factors. Voice frequency, body language, pheromone profile, energy expenditure patterns, even the way humans breathe. All of it together creates a profile that cubs read as safe. Can other species replicate this profile? Someone asked. Greg shook his head. Not completely. The Velcrin have gotten better at mimicking human behavior, and that helps. But there are biological factors they can't change. Humans evolved this way over millions of years. You can't replicate that with training. So humans are necessary, Kessa said. It wasn't a question. For now, yes, Amy admitted. Maybe in the future, with enough time and practice, Velcrin can fully overcome their cubs' instinctual fear. But that might take generations. Jake saw the implications immediately. Humanity wasn't just helpful. They were needed. That gave Earth leverage in galactic politics. It also made them a target. The attack came without warning. Jake was in the garden with a group of cubs when alarms started blaring. Ben rushed in, weapon drawn. We need to get you to safety, Ben said. Now. What's happening? Extremists. A group that calls themselves the Balance Keepers. They don't want humans having this kind of influence. They've taken hostages. Jake looked at the cubs. They were panicking, frightened by the alarms. I can't leave them. Jake, you're a target. If they get you, they get leverage over Earth and the Velcrin. Then we protect everyone, Jake said firmly. Get these cubs to a safe room. I'll go with them. They evacuated through back corridors. Jake carried 2 cubs while Ben led the way. Behind them, Lisa and Danny herded more cubs. The sounds of fighting echoed through the station. The extremists had chosen their moment well. Most of the security forces were dealing with a false alarm in another section. A small team had breached the diplomatic area. They wanted to prove that humans were not as special as everyone thought, that the galaxy didn't need them. Jake and the others made it to a secure room. But they could hear the extremists searching nearby. The cubs trembled, their fear returning. It's okay, Jake whispered to them. We're safe here, one of the cubs whimpered. The sound was loud in the quiet room. A voice called from outside. We know you're in there, human. Send out the cubs and we'll let you live. Ben positioned himself at the door, ready to fight. Jake held the cubs closer. Why are you doing this? Jake called back. Because the galaxy needs to learn it cannot depend on one species, the voice answered. It belonged to a Xinthian, Jake thought. You've been here less than a year and already you're being treated as saviors. It's wrong. It's unbalanced. We're just trying to help, Jake said. Help creates debt. Debt creates control. We won't allow humanity to control galactic affairs. The door started to glow. They were cutting through it. Ben raised his weapon. Jake covered the cubs with his body. Then a roar echoed through the corridor. A Velcrin battle cry full of fury and promise. The sound of fighting came from outside, shouts, weapons fire. Then silence. The door opened. Kessa stood there, her claws extended, her fur matted with blood that wasn't hers. Behind her, a dozen Velcrin warriors had subdued the extremists. You dare threaten cubs under my protection? Kessa snarled at the captured Xinthian. You dare threaten the humans who saved our children? The Xinthian had no answer. Later, after the crisis had passed, Jake sat with Helen. The cubs were finally asleep, exhausted from the day's fear. This is what we were afraid of, Helen said quietly. Humanity becomes important. Humanity becomes a target. We can't stop helping because some people are angry about it, Jake said. No, but we need to be smart about it. We need protection, we need protocols, and we need to train more humans for this work. If something happens to you or the others here, the cubs suffer. She was right. Over the next weeks, they developed new systems. More humans were brought in and trained. Security was increased around all human diplomatic personnel. Plans were made for emergency evacuations. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. A young Velcrin scientist named Ressa approached Jake with an idea. "What if we could teach other species to communicate the way humans do?" she asked. "Not perfectly, but better. If the cubs could learn to trust more species, not just humans, that would solve many problems." "How?" Jake asked. "Exposure therapy. With humans as mediators, gradually introduce cubs to other species. Start with species that are closest to human behavior patterns. Let the cubs learn that while humans are safe, others can be safe too." It was brilliant. They started small. A Meldrani who had spent time on Earth and learned human mannerisms. A Thraxian who had studied human communication. Species by species, carefully chosen, introduced to cubs with humans present. It worked. Slowly, carefully, cubs began to trust others. Not as easily as they trusted humans. But enough. Enough that humanity wasn't the only solution. Jake watched it all happen with pride and a little sadness. Humanity's special role was already diminishing. They had sparked something, but they wouldn't control it. And that, he realized, was exactly how it should be. "We're not here to be needed forever," he told Amy one evening. "We're here to teach. To help others learn what we learned. To share what makes us special so that eventually everyone can do it." Amy smiled. "That's very human of you. Always trying to work yourself out of a job. Maybe. But look at what we've started. Cubs being saved. Species learning to communicate better. The whole galaxy becoming a little more connected. That's worth more than being special." The cubs slept peacefully nearby. Their parents watched over them, no longer helpless. 6 months had passed since Jake first found the cubs in the ventilation grate. Station Meridian looked different now. Where once there had been silence and fear, now there was life. Velcrin cubs played in the gardens, chasing floating toys and climbing on structures built for them. Their laughter, a chirping purr sound, filled the air. Jake stood watching them with a smile on his face. One of the cubs, a bold little female named Kira, spotted him and came running over. She was one of the first he had worked with. Now she showed no fear at all, not of him, not of her parents, not even of the other species that lived on the station. "Up," she demanded in her language. Her translator turned it into a chirp in Jake's ear. He picked her up and she settled on his shoulder, a favorite perch. Her mother watched from nearby but showed no concern. She trusted Jake completely now. "She thinks you're her second father," Kessa said, approaching from the side. The matriarch looked better these days. The worry lines around her eyes had softened. "All the cubs you worked with think that?" "I'm honored," Jake said honestly. "Earth has sent a formal proposal to the Council," Kessa continued. "They want to create a new diplomatic corps. Humans trained specifically in interspecies communication and trust building. They're calling it the Bridge Program." Jake nodded. He had heard about it. "What does the Council think?" "Most support it. Some still worry about human influence growing too large. But after what you've done here, it's hard to argue against it." She paused. "Jake, they want you to lead it." He blinked in surprise. "Me? I'm just a ship captain. I'm not qualified to run a diplomatic program." "You're the most qualified person in the galaxy," Kessa said firmly. "You saw a problem and you fixed it. Not with weapons or technology or politics. With kindness. With patience. That's what the Bridge Program needs." Jake looked at Kira on his shoulder, at the other cubs playing, at the parents watching with love instead of helplessness. Could he do more of this? Could he help more species connect? "I'll think about it," he said. The formal presentation happened a week later. Representatives from 30 species gathered to hear Earth's proposal. Helen presented it with her usual efficiency. "The Bridge Program will train humans in xenopsychology, interspecies communication, and cultural diplomacy," she explained. "They will be stationed throughout the galaxy, available to help when species have difficulty communicating or building trust. This is not about control. It's about service. How do we know humans won't use this for political advantage?" a Calibri delegate asked. "Because it's not in our nature," Jake said, standing up. He hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway. "Humans learned a long time ago that we're stronger together. Back on Earth, we were just one species among millions. We could have tried to dominate everything, but instead we made friends. We brought wolves into our homes and they became dogs. We fed cats and they chose to stay with us. We learned to ride horses, to work with birds, to coexist with creatures that could have been our enemies." He gestured around the room. "You're all worried about what humans might do with this ability. But look at what we've already done. We helped the Velcrin. We didn't ask for payment. We didn't demand concessions. We just helped because that's what you do when someone needs it. Pretty words, the Calibri said, but trust requires proof. Then watch us, Jake replied. Give us a chance. Let us prove that we mean what we say. And if we fail, if we abuse this trust, then remove us. But give us the chance. The vote was close, but it passed. The bridge program was approved. Over the next months, humans arrived from Earth. They came from all walks of life. Teachers and therapists, animal behaviorists and social workers, soldiers trained in de-escalation and artists who understood communication beyond words. They came to learn and to serve. Laura Kim became the head of training. She developed a curriculum that combined human instinct with scientific understanding. Danny, the young intern, turned out to be a natural teacher. He could explain to others what he did instinctively. It's about respect, he told a class of new recruits. You're not better than the beings you're helping. You're not saviors. You're friends. You're bridges. You help them see each other clearly. The program grew. Humans were stationed on dozens of worlds. They helped with more than just frightened cubs. They mediated disputes between species that couldn't understand each other. They helped traumatized beings recover from war. They taught others how to build the kind of trust that came naturally to humans. Not everything went smoothly. There were failures. Some humans let the attention go to their heads and had to be removed from the program. Some aliens refused to accept human help out of pride. And there were still extremist groups that saw the bridge program as a threat. But slowly, carefully, it worked. The galaxy began to change. Jake accepted the leadership role, but with conditions. He insisted on spending half his time in the field, working directly with beings who needed help. He refused an office on Earth, choosing instead to stay on Station Meridian. This is where it started, he told Helen. This is where I belong. One day, almost a year after it all began, Jake was called to a remote station on the edge of known space. A new species had been discovered. They were called the Varani, and they were in trouble. The Varani were prey animals, evolved from creatures that had spent millennia running from predators. Now that they had achieved space travel and met other species, they were paralyzed with fear. They couldn't negotiate, couldn't trade, couldn't even speak to other species without panicking. Jake arrived with a team. The Varani huddled in their ships, too afraid to come out. Every attempt at first contact had failed. How do we help beings who are afraid of everyone? Amy asked. She had stayed with the program, using her scientific skills to understand each new challenge. Jake thought about the cubs, about Kira on his shoulder that first day, about trust and patience and time. We start small, he said. We show them we're safe, and we wait for them to come to us. It took weeks. Jake and his team set up a camp visible from the Varani ships, but not threatening. They went about their daily lives, eating, talking, playing games. They sent messages but didn't demand responses. They showed through their actions that they meant no harm. Slowly, carefully, the Varani began to watch, then to listen, then finally to respond. The first Varani who left their ship was named Talus. She was small and covered in soft feathers. Her eyes were huge and dark. She trembled as she approached Jake's camp. Jake sat very still. He had learned this lesson well. Let them come to you. Talus stopped 10 feet away. Her translator made soft clicking sounds. You don't smell like hunters, she said. We're not here to hunt, Jake replied gently. We're here to be friends. Friends with predators? Humans are predators, yes. But we're also friends. We learned that the two things don't have to be separate. Talus took a small step closer, then another. Jake didn't move. Finally, she was close enough to touch. She reached out one small hand and placed it on Jake's arm. You feel warm, she said. Alive, real. So do you, Jake said, smiling. That was the beginning. More Varani emerged. They met humans and learned that not all predators were threats. Jake's team taught them about Earth, about the long history of different species living together. And the Varani began to hope. 3 months later, the Varani signed their first trade agreement. With humanity as intermediaries, they began talking to other species. They were still cautious, still easily frightened. But they were trying, and that was enough. Jake returned to Station Meridian to find it transformed. The cubs he had first worked with were now young adults. They had grown up knowing humans, trusting humans, and they were teaching the next generation. Kira, now almost full-grown, greeted him with enthusiasm. She was studying to be a diplomat herself. I want to do what you do, she told Jake. Build bridges, help species understand each other. You'll be amazing at it, Jake said. Kessa called him to her office. She looked older now but happier. The council wants to honor you, she said. Create a statue in your image. Name a station after you. They have a dozen proposals. Jake shook his head. I don't need that. I just did what anyone would do. But not anyone could do it. That's the point. Humanity has a gift and you showed us how to use it. That deserves recognition. Then recognize the program, not me. Honor all the humans working every day to build bridges. Honor the beings who had the courage to accept help. But not just me. In the end, they compromised. No statue of Jake, but a memorial to the Kesali, the extinct species that had taught the Velcrin cubs about trust without knowing it, and a hall of names listing every human who had served in the bridge program. Jake stood at the memorial's dedication. Thousands attended. Species from across the galaxy came to pay respect. The Kesali are gone, Kessa said during her speech. They cannot know that their legacy lives on. But we know. We remember. And we honor them by honoring those who carry forward their gift for connection. After the ceremony, Jake walked through the gardens one last time. The cubs he had first saved were everywhere now, playing, learning, living without fear. Their parents watched with pride and joy. One cub, new to the station, approached Jake carefully. She was still nervous around most beings, but she looked at Jake with curiosity instead of fear.